My name is Edward Johnson. I was born in Hamilton on March the 28th, 1923. My mother's name was Emily Flora, and my father's name was the same as mine, Edward Leslie Johnson. So I thank my mother. There was a story told by my father that when my mother was pregnant, before I was born, she loved opera, and particularly the Italian tenor Enrico Caruso. And she said to my father, apparently, before I was born, that if this child was a boy, I want him to be an opera singer. We got along very well. My mother was the strong one in the family. She directed the children and paid the finances. My father was sort of one of those people that just let the world go by. He was perfectly happy not to be involved in any of the family affairs. He was a tool and die maker. He worked for the Frost Steel and Wire Company in Hamilton. No, I had 3 sisters and a brother. My older sister's name was Frances, my brother's name was George, my sister next to me was Muriel, and my youngest sister was Emily. And Emily and George were twins. Yes, pretty well, although my brother used to drive me crazy. To give you an example, years ago, the diamond socks were the fad, and I had gone out and bought a pair of diamond socks, and I was going to wear them when I went out with my girlfriend, and I went up to the dresser, took my socks out, put them on, and there was a hole in the toe. Apparently my brother had worn them before I had a chance to. And when I worked at DeFasco, I used to ride a bike down to the work, and I was on 3 shifts, day shift, afternoon shift, and night shift. And one night I went out to ride my bike down to the factory, and the front tire was flat, and it seemed that my brother had taken a ride on my bike, and the tire was flat, and he didn't say a word about it. So I had to fix the tire up and then go down, and naturally I was late for work. The one I got along with best was my older sister, because she was very athletic. She played baseball and soccer and so forth. And because I was a singer, the bigger kids picked on me usually at school. And she was my protector. As soon as a kid was going to pick on me, she'd just give him a pop right in the face, and that was it. I started singing when I was 6 years old, and my mother was my inspiration, because she was the one who, we went through the Depression in 1930, around the 1930, and as you know, things were pretty tough. My father lost his job as a tool and die maker, and we had a pretty hard time. The children had to go over to Eastwood Park and dig up morels, which are a form of mushroom, And we went home, and my mother cooked them up in milk, and that was usually our meal. My mother had to take a job as a cleaning lady for the rich people in the Southwest End. And even though she was a cleaning lady and worked pretty hard, she always found enough money to pay for my voice lessons. I studied first of all with a woman named Victoria Stairs. There were two sisters, Gertrude and Victoria. They were old maids, and they had a studio near Herkimer and James in Hamilton. And I used to take one lesson a week, and I studied with her from the age of 8 until my voice changed at 14. Well, that came after I sang in the competitions in the public school. I went to Bonetta Public School in Hamilton, and they had a marvelous music program, not only of instrumentalists, but of vocalists. And they had a vocal competition every year, and I entered the vocal competitions 3 years in a row, and was fortunate enough to win a gold medal in each of the competitions. And then I also sang at the Canadian National Exhibitions, and I won a silver and a gold medal in those competitions. The interesting thing was that the director of the music system in the public schools of Hamilton approached my mother and said, "This boy should have lessons. He's got a wonderful talent." And that's when my mother decided to give me lessons, or pay for my lessons. The sister Gertrude, the sister to Victoria, with whom I studied, was also the choir director of St. Thomas's Anglican Church in Hamilton. And I joined the choir as a boy soprano soloist. And that's where I learned to read music, because the choir leader would throw an anthem at you and you'd never seen before, and you were expected to read the music. And I could read anything, practically anything, musically when I was 14. I didn't really learn anything technically about the voice from Victoria Stairs, but I did learn a lot of songs. And this is why, after my voice changed, that I had to decide to find another teacher. And I heard about a teacher, an English teacher in Brantford, whose name was Frederick Lord. And I went to audition for him, and he took me on as a pupil, but I left him in about 1 month because I didn't feel that he was giving me technically anything worthwhile. And that's when I was talking to a friend of mine, Wilf Searle, who was a conductor and so forth, and he mentioned this woman named Margaret Moreland down in Toronto, who taught the bel canto technique of singing. So I traveled down to Toronto on the bus, and I auditioned for her, and she took me on as a pupil. And that's where I first learned the bel canto technique. And before I went to New York, I gave a recital at the Halconian Hall in Toronto, and the two major critics of the Globe and Mail and a Toronto Star were there to review the recital. And the headlines in the paper the next day were, "Great career seen opening before tenor." Because a technique that was used by all the great singers 100 or more years ago, singers like Caruso, Gigli, Ezio Pinza, Melba, Gati, Gali Kurchi, and so forth. And it was a technique that allowed a singer to sing effortlessly and to produce the voice in 4 acts of opera without being tired at the end of the opera. And this technique, unfortunately, has been lost because the teachers that taught it years ago died off without leaving the technique to anyone else. I was very fortunate in that when I went to New York, that I found a teacher who taught the bel canto technique. Something happened to me when I was about 14. In Hamilton, there was an association called the Community Concerts, and they brought in famous artists from all over the world to perform on the stage of the Palace Theatre, which is no longer in existence, on King Street in Hamilton. And one of the artists that was brought up to Hamilton to sing was the great Swedish tenor, Jussi Björling. And I fortunately was given a ticket by one of my mother's friends to go and hear him, because the friend knew that I was a singer and wanted me to hear him. And so I sat on the balcony and I waited, and out onto the stage marched this very stocky individual, and he stood in the crook of the piano and he started to sing, and it was just like, it was heaven. I said to myself, if I could sing like that. Anyway, the interesting thing was that later on, when I joined the Met, I was able to meet him and also sing with him on the Metropolitan stage. Dream come true. Well, I'd always wanted to be an opera singer. It's interesting, if you ask a young individual, like or a young boy, what they want to be, and he'll say he wants to be a doctor, a policeman, a lawyer, or whatever. Whenever anybody asked me what I wanted to be, I said I wanted to be an opera singer. Well, nobody knew what the hell an opera singer was, the heck an opera singer was. Yes, I think my fate in life was destined before my mother gave birth to me, because she wanted me to be an opera singer. So I had to make enough money to get to New York, and the recreation director of the Central Collegiate, where I went to high school, was an amazing man. His name was Captain Cornelius, and he ran the ROTC. He coached the football team. He took a rifle team over to Bisley in England, where they won high honors. And he also directed and conducted the operettas, which we did at high school. And I was fortunate that I sang in 2 of his operettas. One was the Mystic Mirror, and I forget the name of the other one, but I had the leads in both of them. And when I finished high school at 17, he called me into his office and he said, well, what do you plan to do now? And I said, well, I really don't know, but I've got to find something that's going to give me enough money to get to New York to be an opera singer. And he said, well, I'll tell you what you do. You go down to DeFasco and ask Don Pepper, the personnel director, and tell him that he's got to give you a job. And I did that. I went down and talked to Don Pepper. And as a consequence, I was taken on and given a job as a chemist in DeFasco. Now, the war was just about ready to start, World War II, 1939. And I was given a deferment because I was in an essential industry. DeFasco made gun barrels and armor plate. I was given a deferment every time my call came to join up. So I never did get into the war, which I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I don't think I could kill people. So I finally earned enough money to go down to New York. Now, I was a very green kid from Hamilton, and here I am going down to this big city of New York. I didn't know anybody. I'd never been in a city like New York in my life before, and yet, because I wanted to be an opera singer, I knew it was what I had to do, and that's what I did. I went to New York at the age of 22. I went to New York because there was no outlet for opera in Canada at that time. There were no opera companies in Canada. Now we have an opera company in Montreal, Toronto, Hamilton, Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver, and in most of the large cities in the United States. The only opera companies that were available in the States were New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. And so that's why I went to New York. It's the only place I could sing opera. Well, I arrived in New York and I stayed with some friends of mine who had, my mother had gone in Scotland, had gone to school with Ike and Liz Drummond, who lived in Yonkers, which is a suburb of New York. And she contacted them by letter and asked them if I could stay with them while I was in New York. And they had no children, and they said, by all means. And so I stayed with them for 1 year, and then I found my own apartment actually it wasn't an apartment, it was a room. This was before I was married. And I found a room on 135th Street in New York. And I stayed with a Jewish couple named Grushko. I met my wife at the Royal Hamilton Yacht Club. Before I went to New York, a school friend and I bought a Rainbow class sloop. Now there were 4 or 5 of these in a fleet at the Royal Hamilton Yacht Club. And we used to sail these boats every Wednesday and Saturday, and Pat's brother had one of the boats. And as a consequence, Pat lived in Buffalo. She was a graduate of the Albright Art School at the University of Buffalo, and she happened to come up because her family lived at Indian Point in Burlington, and she came up to visit one weekend and came to the yacht club, and that's where we met. And we hit it off right away. And I, of course, asked her out, and she agreed. And from then on, we were going steady. Now, the interesting thing was that she was engaged to a sub-lieutenant in the Canadian Navy from Halifax at the time, and she had jilted this fellow to go with me. Of course, I was not a bad-looking guy in my day, and I had taken up weightlifting. And they used to call me Muscles at the Royal Hamilton Yacht Club. So, I went down to New York for a year before I came back and married Pat. We had a big social wedding at St. Peter's Church in Hamilton. Had about 400 guests. Her family were quite well off. Her father owned the Allen Electrical Engineering Company in Hamilton, and they had a house, a beautiful house at Indian Point, which was a very ritzy section of Burlington. They had a big Packard and so forth, and so we had a real social type wedding at the Royal Connaught Hotel. We had the reception, and then I took her to New York, and she was with me until later on. We had an apartment in Greenwich Village on West 13th Street. It was quite an interesting building because it was over 100 years old. It was 3 stories high, brick, and it had a courtyard between the building on the street and another identical building at the back of the courtyard. And it had a passageway in the middle of the building on the street where apparently the horses and buggies used to drive under into the courtyard. And the courtyard was known as the sculptor's court because at one time the sculptors were in the court chopping away at their stone in order to make their statues and so forth. And we lived there for 5 years in the village, and then we moved to Long Island, to Flushing, Long Island, where we bought a house, and we commuted between Long Island and New York. Eventually I bought a car and was able to drive from New York to Long Island. First of all, I won a scholarship to what is known as the Masters Arts Institute, and they put on operas, and I was able to perform the role of Pinkerton in Madame Butterfly with them. I also achieved a position as a tenor soloist at the Marble Collegiate Church on Fifth Avenue, which was the home church of Norman Vincent Peale, the proponent of the power of positive thinking. He was the first one to write a book, and it was known as The Power of Positive Thinking. Now, I was in the choir, which was composed of only 12 people, 3 basses, 3 tenors, 3 sopranos, and 3 altos, and they were all professional singers. The organist, Charles Cronum, composed a number of anthems, and I listened to Norman Vincent Peale 2 services a Sunday, and he attracted people from all over the United States. This was a fairly big church. It had a balcony going along 3 sides, and he used to pack the church and have 300 or 400 people in the Sunday school listening to his sermons over the PA. Now, this influenced my whole life. I listened to that man talk about positive thinking for 2 services a Sunday for 2 years, and I became a positive thinker, and I have remained a positive thinker all my life. I auditioned for the Metropolitan Opera. Now, I didn't know that in order to audition for the Metropolitan Opera, you had to have a manager or an agent make the appointment. I was a green kid from Hamilton, what did I know? So I wandered into the Metropolitan Opera and I told them I wanted to audition. And for some reason, they said they allowed me to audition. And I was given a contract at the Metropolitan, and I sang there for 4 years, from 1947 to 1951. The interesting thing was that the managing director of the Met and I had several things in common. We were both Canadian, we were both tenors, we were born close to each other. He was born in Guelph and I was born in Hamilton. And his wife died at childbirth, and my first wife died. And we used to meet on the stage and transfer. He would get my letters and I would get his letters, and we'd meet on the stage and give each other our mail. The original manager of the opera was Gary Casazza, who was an Italian. He died, and they had to find another managing director. And they chose a baritone named Herbert Witherspoon to be the new managing director, with Edward Johnson as his assistant. Well, unfortunately, Herbert Witherspoon died after 6 months of being in the job as managing director, which meant that Edward Johnson took over as managing director of the opera. Now, he innovated a number of things at the Met. He was the first one to allow American singers to sing on the stage of the Met without having had a European experience. Prior to that, Gatti Casazza insisted that in order to sing at the Metropolitan, the singer had to have European experience, having sung at La Scala in Milan, or Covent Garden in England, or the Staatsoper in Vienna. But he allowed American singers. And a lot of the very famous American singers, like Leonard Warren, Richard Tucker, Jan Pearce, Eleanor Steber, Risa Stevens, and so forth, sang at the Met because of the fact that Edward Johnson allowed them to sing without having had a European experience. Another thing he innovated were the Metropolitan Opera broadcasts on Saturday afternoon, sponsored by the Texaco Company. And so he made a marvelous manager, and he was like a father to me when I was there. I could go to him at any time and ask his advice about what I should do with a certain facet of my career, and he was wonderful. I left the Met after 4 years in 1951, and I went on tour with the Charles Wagner Opera Company as Alfredo in La Traviata by Verdi. Now, I'm pretty sure Edward Johnson was the one who gave me the opportunity to sing on tour with that company, because the stage director's name was Désiré Defrère, and he was stage director at the Met, and he was also the stage director with this company that I went on tour with. It was an exciting experience. We traveled by bus, a Greyhound bus, and we hit a lot of cities. As a matter of fact, we hit a new city practically every night. We would travel all day by bus, get in the afternoon, and have a light snack before we sang, and then perform. And then after the performance, we would go to a restaurant and have our big meal. Then we would go back to the hotel and go to bed and sleep, we hope, and get up at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning and get on the bus again, travel all day, and do the same thing. But it was an exciting experience, and I saw a lot of sang in practically every state in the Union in the continental United States at the time. Pat had a job or a position as a cosmetic buyer at the big Bloomingdale's store, and so she had a job that she was working at, Bloomingdale's, New York. Well, I had done the New York premieres of two of Benjamin Britten's operas, Albert Herring and The Rape of Lucretia, for a company called Opera Futures. And I got a call one day from the producing director of the CBC Opera Company in Toronto, and he had come down to New York because they were doing a performance of Peter Grimes in Toronto, and the tenor who was originally scheduled to do the leading role of Peter Grimes took sick and couldn't do the opera. And he found out somehow that I had done two of Benjamin Britten's operas, and he phoned me up and he said, "I understand you have done two of Benjamin Britten's operas." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we're putting on a production of Peter Grimes in Toronto, and our tenor has taken sick, and I'm wondering if you would like to undertake the role of Peter Grimes. And I said, well, that would be wonderful. I said, when does the performance go on? And he said, well, it goes on in 9 days. And I said, I said, I don't think I could learn that role in 9 days. That's a big role. The score is about an inch thick, and it's a big role. You're on the stage most of the time. And he said, well, I'll tell you what you do. He said, you fly up to Toronto here. This was on a Thursday. He said, you fly up here to Toronto, and I'll give you a coach, and if you work with him all weekend, and on Monday, if you feel you can do the opera, fine. If not, we'll pay all your expenses, and that'll be that. So I flew up to Toronto, and he put me in touch with one of the finest coaches I've ever coached with. That was Dr. George Bruff. He had a PhD from Oxford in music, and he was a fantastic pianist. Well, I think we had about 4 hours sleep on the weekend, and since I was a good reader, having learned at the age of 14, the producing director said to me, well, what do you think? Do you think you can do it? I said, well, if you're willing to take a chance on me, I'm willing to do it. And I did that role in 9 days. And apparently it was a great success. From one of the telegrams I received, the director, the conductor, said it was even better than the production they had done 3 years ago of the same opera using the tenor that had gotten sick. And as a consequence of doing that, I was given the next year the role of the prisoner in a 12-tone opera by the composer called Dalla Piccola. Now this was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life musically. This was a 12-tone opera, which meant that the orchestra was, I had an aria, let's put it this way, I had an aria in this opera, and the orchestra was playing a half a beat behind me and a half a tone below me. And I had to maintain my aria, my role, my musical part, against this opposition. And it was quite an interesting experience. Anyway, it was a great success, and as a consequence of that, the following year, I was given the part of in the Rake's Progress by Stravinsky. Now this was another interesting experience. This guy Stravinsky was a modern composer, and he changed time about every 3 bars. So half the time you didn't know what the time was. But again, having been a good reader, I was able to do the opera. And as a consequence, Sir Ernest Macmillan contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to do the role of the evangelist in this Bach St. Matthew's Passion with the Toronto Symphony. And I said yes, that would be fine. Now this role of the evangelist is a leading role, but you're singing a cappella most of the time. The only accompaniment you have is the odd chord from a harpsichord. And I did this in Massey Hall, and then we went to New York and performed the same production at Carnegie Hall with the Toronto Symphony. Now I can brag and say that I have sang in both the Massey Hall and Carnegie Hall and the Metropolitan. As a result of that, they were just about to form the Canadian Opera Company. And I had worked with a man, a director in Pittsburgh named Herman Geiger Torell. And I did the role of Ferrando in Mozart's Così fan tutte. And he had become the director of the Canadian Opera Company in Toronto. And he wrote to me in New York and asked me if I wanted to or would willing to do the same role of Ferrando in the Così fan tutte with the opera company in Toronto. Now he explained that this was the first year that they were going to produce the opera. They didn't have a lot of money, and so they would pay me $100 a production. Well, $100 is $100. So, I mean, I said, sure. So I went up to Toronto, and I performed the opera, and I performed it with Don Gerard, who later, as a baritone, sang at the Covent Garden and Sadler Wells, and also with a man named Jan Rubisch. I don't know whether you've heard of him, but if you've seen the opera or the movie called Witness, there was an Amish grandfather in that movie, and that was Jan Rubisch. Now, Jan Rubisch had a marvelous bass baritone voice. As a matter of fact, he is now an actor. You'll probably see him in a number of American movies. And his wife was in a soap opera in New York. And so we did this Così fan tutte, and it was a great success. One of the sopranos who sang in the role was, what was her name? Sylvia Gray. And she was the wife of George Crumb, who was for many years the director of the National Ballet. Well, I was very lucky because I married a girl who was behind me 100%. She was a Capricorn, and Capricorn are noted for they say that if you want to be a president of a company, you should marry a Capricorn, because they don't let anything go by chance. They encourage you. They're always after you to achieve, and so yeah, Pat was behind me 100%. It's an unfortunate thing, but in 1959 or 1958, my wife developed cancer of the lymph nodes, which is called Hodgkin's disease. And she complained about being very tired and so forth. And she had a lump in her groin. And we had come up to Canada to visit her family. And her mother was going out to Dr. Dingle in Burlington to have a medical. And while she was out there, she asked Dr. Dingle to look at Pat. And he took one look at the lump in her groin and said, I've got to take you to the hospital. You've got to be examined. Well, they took a biopsy of this growth and found out it was cancer. And at that time, there was no cure for Hodgkin's. You were lucky if you lived 5 years. The average was 2 years. Now they have chemotherapy and medicine that allow a Hodgkin's disease patient to live a normal life. But at that time, there was no cure for it. But they did give her mustard nitrogen, which caused the disease to go into recession for a whole year. And she was healthy enough that she could have gone to an insurance company and gotten an insurance policy. But then it became what is known as systemic, where it goes into the bloodstream and it traveled throughout her whole body. And eventually she died. So that's why I came back. Now I had to make a decision whether I wanted to stay in New York and pursue my career, or whether I wanted to give it up. Well, Pat and I had gone through this together. She had been behind me 100%. And so I just decided that I didn't want it anymore. I moved to Hamilton, and I lived on Caroline Street, just above Herkimer in Hamilton. I was very lucky because one of my good friends, Ed Stewart, who was the conductor of the DeFasco Male Chorus, approached me and asked me if I would be willing to join the chorus and act as their featured soloist. And I took that on. And I was with the chorus for 32 years. And I also joined Central Presbyterian Church as a tenor soloist. Fortunately, a paid tenor soloist. So I was with them for 12 years, and then I retired. Well, I had to make money, after all, you know. But so I decided that since I'd had two good vocal teachers, that I should try myself at voice teaching. I felt I would be a good vocal teacher because I had had two people who showed me how to sing bel canto, and that's how I started to teach. Now, I put only one advertisement in the paper, in the Spectator, and I arrived with 8 pupils after about a week. And after 6 months, I had 60. Now, I also adjudicated the singers for the Hamilton Theatre Incorporated, because one of the fellows that I had gone to school with, Milt Sherman, was the president of the Hamilton Theatre Incorporated, and he phoned me up and asked me if I would help him adjudicate the singers. And I did that for 3 of the Hamilton Theatre Incorporated productions. One of the sopranos that sang with the Canadian Opera Company, in fact, she did the first Madame Butterfly that was produced by the Canadian Opera Company, June Kowalczyk. Marvelous soprano voice. And she approached me and said that she and a baritone from Vancouver, Cliff Cox, wanted to form an opera company in Hamilton. And they felt with my experience that I would be invaluable. And I said, wow, that'd be terrific. And so we formed the Hamilton Opera Company, and we performed quite a number of operas with full orchestra, costume, and so forth. We produced The Gypsy Baron, La Bohème, Carmen, Cavalleria Rusticana, Faust, The Bartered Bride, so forth, and Madame Butterfly. Since I had sung numerous productions of the Hamilton Butterfly in my experience, they were looking for a stage director, and I said, well, you don't need a stage director, I can direct this opera. I've sung it often enough that I know what everybody's doing. And anyway, I became the stage director and also sang the leading role as Lieutenant Pinkerton in the production. Now, this was a very interesting thing because to be a director and to sing the leading role, I had to be conscious of what everybody was doing and yet still have enough interest in my own involvement, okay? And I remember that the stage director of the opera had built this bridge, which is in the first act, where the family, Butterfly's family, have to come down from the wings over the bridge onto the stage. Well, unfortunately, the rake of the bridge was too steep, and when we did the dress rehearsal, the chorus was floundering, trying to get across the bridge, and so I said to the carpenter, who was one, I said, we have to put something on that bridge, either slats or something, so that the chorus can get off before we start singing our famous duet. And that's what he did. He put the slats on the bridge, and during the first production of the opera, the chorus was able to get across the bridge in good time. Now, the staging was that when they were going across the bridge, I was standing next to the bridge with my back to the audience, and I was saying to them, get going, get going, get going, move, move, move. And I was giving them stage directions as I was standing there, you see. But yes, the Hamilton Opera Company was an institute. We paid for all our own expenses. We got a very small grant from the Council of Hamilton, which was practically nothing, a couple of $1,000. And we had to pay for all the costumes and so forth. And it finally got so expensive for us that we had to give it up. But an interesting, we had a musical director who later got the Order of Canada and who also played for singers such as Maureen Forrester and Lois Marshall in Canada. His name was Stewart, and he was a marvelous pianist. The production we did of Gypsy Baron, I went to the union to hire musicians to play in the orchestra pit. And if you know anything about the unions, the guy that's the head of the union really doesn't know anything about musicians at all. And I told him how many violins I needed, how many this and that, and he gave me musicians. Well, the first rehearsal I had, they couldn't even read the music. So I went back to him and I said, you're sending me musicians that can't read. And he said, oh, I'll send you some more. Anyway, he sent me musicians that were pretty poor. So I said to them, I'm going to put a piano in the pit and I'm going to have Stuart Hamilton play the music on the piano. And if you happen to sing or hit the right notes, that's great. But if you don't worry about it. And that's what we did. We put a piano in the pit, and Stuart Hamilton, our musical director, played the thing on the piano. Well, I have numerous hobbies. You can see by the pictures of the paintings on the wall that I am a painter in oils. I have also carved in wood. You can see by the dogs that I've carved out of one piece of basswood. And I've carved the decoys behind me. I also like to cook, and photography is another of my hobbies. I have my examples of my pictures on the wall downstairs. And I also compose music on my computer. I've learned not to fight life. It's easier to go with the waves than against the waves. I've always been a positive thinker, and that's been with me all my life. If I go into anything, I go in with the idea I'm going to succeed, not fail. I think positive thinking people are both healthy mentally and physically. Negative thinking people have a tendency to get sick, they get depressed, and so forth. They have done tests medically where they've taken two people who have the same cancer, the same age, and the positive thinker has lived for 6 years and the negative thinker has lived for 6 months. So I feel my positive attitude has been the reason why I've succeeded as a singer, and it's the reason why I've succeeded as a teacher. The only regret I have, in a way, is the fact that my wife died when she was 39, and I wasn't able to continue my career, because I felt that if I did continue my career, I could have been one of the top 10 tenors in the world. But there's no sense having regrets. That's gone by. I've learned to live one day at a time, because that's all you can live. You have no control really over what's going to happen in the future. We have no control even what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, neither do you. So when I get up in the morning, I live to my fullest until I go to bed at night. Then I repeat the involvement the next day. So you have to live life to its full every day. Don't think you have all the time in the world, because before you know it, you're going to be old.